everybody. Welcome to Crossroads. If you are joining us online, welcome to Crossroads. I am Reid, Robinette. I am so glad that you are with us today. And we are talking about the church of the future. How many of you are ready for the future church? Exactly. Yeah, I know. Nobody wants that, do you? No, somebody's thinking, oh, please make it not happen like that. But we started last week this series and talking about what is the church of the future and why does it matter to us today. And I understand that as I talk to you this morning or whenever you're listening to this message, that you have probably a leaning towards the future, the present, or the past, right? I mean, some of you just are always thinking about the future, and that just comes naturally to you. Some of you always think about the past. You're a history buff. You love learning about stuff that's happened in the past. And some of you are like, I don't have time for any of that. I just got to make it through this day, right? And you're like, just give me this day. That's what I focus on. So I think probably everybody listening right now, including you watching online, fall into one of those three categories. So here's what I want you to do right off the jump. I want you to turn to the person next to you, and I want you to tell them out loud which one of these groups you tend to fall into. The future group, the present group, or the past group. Or I'll give you one more. If you're one of those people that says, I hate when you make me pick one of these categories, you could just turn to the person next to you and say, I'm one of those people, okay? So even online, if you have somebody around you or you're chatting in the room, on your mark, get set, go. Go ahead, okay? Good, I'm one of those people, yes. All right. Okay, so here's some good news. Okay, you can stop. Here's the good news. It doesn't really matter whether you are someone who tends to focus on the future, tends to focus on the past, or tends to focus on the present. This series, even though it's called Future Church, is going to require us to look back, to look forward, and to act now. So it'll take all of those, all of us, in order to take the information that God's given to us in this series and to put it into action. And here's why we're talking about the church of the future, because the church of the future will be deeply influenced by the choices, the prayers, the priorities, and the actions of the church today. Right? We are, in one sense, from a different perspective, we are the church of the future. We're here because of the prayers, the priorities, the actions of some group of people in the past. For a lot of us, it is the group of people who gathered to start Crossroads Church. I mean, you're sitting or watching a Crossroads church service, and that would not have happened if these 5 families in 2002 didn't start this thing. But it goes farther back than that. I mean, think about, we are a non-denominational church. When was that allowed? Well, it was around the 1800s, actually. There was no non-denominational expression of the church in any big way, in any large way, until about 1800. But what about Protestants? We're not a Catholic church. You can tell we don't have any kneelers or anything like that. I don't have a little the collar on or anything like that. And when did that happen? See, for the first 1,500 years, it was one church. It was just the Catholic Church. And so Martin Luther was somebody who influenced what we're doing today. We go all the way back, right? The church in the first century, when Jesus left, if they fumbled the ball, we wouldn't be here. The church of the future is always deeply impacted by the priorities and the actions and the choices of the church that came before. And so we want to make sure that it doesn't end with us, or it doesn't go off the rails with us. We want to make sure that the actions and the priorities and the choices, the prayers, the steps of faith that we are taking today empower the church of the future to be what Jesus wanted it to be, right? We don't want to be the generation that says, with us, it just took a left turn at Albuquerque. And that's on us. We get to influence, deeply influence, the church of the future. So last week, we went all the way back. Kevin Size talked about in Matthew chapter 16, the first time that the word church was even used in the New Testament. It was used by Jesus. And he said, I'm going to build my church. And so we learned a couple of things from that. We learned, one, the church is Jesus' idea. It wasn't made up by anybody else. He took a secular term, applied it to, he didn't say, I'm going to build a new synagogue. I'm going to build a new religious system. He said, I'm going to build a new gathering, a new movement. And that's what we are. And we learned that the church belongs to Jesus. He says, I'm going to build my church. So this is not Reid's church or Kevin's church or Aaron's church, or it's Jesus' church. He will build his church. And then we learn this, unbelievable, that the future of the church is unstoppable. Jesus said right from the beginning, right when he cast this idea about what he was going to build, he said, and nothing, the gates of Hades will not be able to stop my church. And you know what you are? You are proof of that. Yeah, here you are. And think about all of the things that you would have thought might have stopped the church that Jesus was building. How about governments that were opposed to the church? The first 200 years, it was illegal. You were put to death for being a Christ follower and gathering in a church. That didn't stop the church. How about bad church leaders? There's been a lot of them. And yet here you are. It didn't stop the church. Bad music. God knows there's been a lot of that. Didn't stop the church. Jesus said, nothing's going to stop my church. And here you are. You're not only proof of that, you're a partner in that. That he says, you can be a part of what I'm building, what I'm doing as the church moves forward. And then the last thing we learn, when Jesus first thought of this idea of the church, was he gives the keys to the kingdom to a young leader named Peter. You remember that? And he changes his name. He was Simon, and now he says Peter. And he says, and I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom. Do you know what it means to give the keys to somebody? It means you trust them on some level. Yes, who do you give keys to your house to? Random, scary-looking people? I'm just checking. Some of you are like, well, with that one guy, remember? Who do you give the keys to your cars to? Somebody that you trust on some level. And so get this. Jesus, after he gives this great idea, this is what I'm starting, he gives the keys to this fellow named Peter. And Peter is one of the most act first, think second leaders that you've ever seen in your life. He is. And you think, well, he becomes really famous, right? Saint Peter. Here's how prepared Peter was for the job of getting the keys to the kingdom. About a paragraph later, after Jesus says, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, not Peter, but his profession of faith. And I give you the keys to the kingdom. About a paragraph later, he calls him Satan. Yeah. Anybody of you ever had a teenager and you trust them in one moment, and then the next moment you're like, I'm sure you're Satan. I don't know what the deal is here. That was Peter. He was young. He was impetuous. He was act first, think second. And Jesus goes, perfect. You're the perfect leader for this thing I'm starting. Ha! And here we are. So we're learning, okay, what would Jesus tell us if he was here today about how we can affect the church of the future? So we're going to pick up today with the last lesson before Jesus goes to the cross. He's got Peter Peter's got the keys. He's got the 12, and he's gathering them one last time. He knows what's about to happen, and he knows that it is going to be, in one sense, in their hands. And he wants to make sure that they have the right picture. What does he do? I'm glad you asked. Let's read about it. John chapter 13. I'm going to read verses 1 to 17. Then we'll come back and make some comments. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God, and he was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter. Here's our guy. He's got the keys. Who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," Peter said, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Well, unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you," for he knew who was going to betray him, and that is why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. What a great question. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." This is God's word. Now think of it for a second. Jesus got one last time, one last opportunity to leave a lasting impression on the people that he's turning over this idea that will change the world. And he wants to make sure that they've spent 3 years together, but this is the last time. And he's going to make sure that they are clear, that they have a picture of what he expects of them. How would you have done it? Now, I started thinking about that this week, and it was a little difficult because first you have to imagine that you have unlimited power and unlimited resources. And if I wanted to make an impact and I had unlimited power and unlimited resources, let me tell you, I would have had a spectacular presentation. It would have been, pyrotechnics, and I would have probably levitated or at least walked on water again, or, brought back like the greatest hits, reminding them of all the things over the past. That's not what Jesus did. What did he do? He washed their feet. What? Like that's the last thing? That's what you wanted them to remember? And so here's what I want you to remember about this moment. Jesus' last lesson was love. The thing that he wanted to demonstrate to make sure that his disciples were clear on was how to love people. That's what he wanted more than anything else. With all of the resources in the world, with all the wisdom in the world, that's what he thought was so critical for the church of the future, was that they would understand what it looked like to love people. I think it's interesting in John's gospel, the word love is used 6 times in the first 12 chapters. And it is used 31 times in the next 4 chapters. When it gets to this move towards the cross, it is so clear from John's perspective that the one thing that Jesus was trying to make very, very clear was how the church of the future would stand or fall on this one thing, their ability to love other people. So, what do we learn? What did he teach in this one action about love? I'll give you a couple of thoughts. One, in verse 1, we hear that Jesus started and ended with love. He said he had loved them, and then when he got to the end, he loved them. He started and finished with love. That means that the primary teaching in the middle was what? It's not a trick question. Yeah, love. Yeah, that it all pointed in one direction. That it was, if it is not loving, then we have misinterpreted the actions of Jesus. If you think that what he did was unloving, because it says he started with love, he ended with love, he loved them to the end. That's why this one diagnostic question, when I learned it, has really replaced so many other questions that I bring before any situation. And here's the question: what does love require of me? Super easy, simple question to remember. Really hard to answer sometimes. Well, not hard to answer, hard to do. It's usually very obvious what love would require me to do. I just don't really want to a lot of the time. But here's what I'm telling you. The church of the future, if it's not centered around this particular element of Jesus' teaching, is not the church that Jesus envisioned. Because he said, it starts with love, it ends with love. Now, the little sentence there in verse 1 says he loved them to the end. Other translations say he loved them to the full extent. This word telos is the word there. It really means to end up where you were aiming. That's really the word. To hit the bullseye, to complete the shot. And that's what it's saying Jesus is doing here. He is loving to the full extent. One commentator said it's like a telescope, one of those ones that crunches down and you pull it open like that. And then it's full capacity, full extent. That's what Jesus was about to do. And then he washed feet. Then he just washed feet. And so let's get really clear on number 2. Jesus not only started with love, ended with love, he demonstrated so he wouldn't get confused about what it really is he's talking about. So he demonstrates love. Some of you know, in the first century, a foot washer was a regular part of a social gathering. If you were going to invite people into your house for a meal, one of the servants, usually the lowest guy on the totem pole, was designated as foot washer guy. And you would recline at a table, so it was maybe more important than it is today, even to wash your hands, because your feet were not only going to bother you, they were going to be stuck near somebody else's food, And so they had a foot washer guy. And so we hear this story, and we don't know where the foot washer servant was. Maybe there weren't enough servants, what have you, but they're all there. All the disciples are there, and they're there for the meal, and they must have noticed at this point, as they were getting ready to be seated around the table, that there was no feet being washed. But yet, nobody steps up. I wonder if they were giving each other looks, like, come on. Somebody needs to wash some feet around this place. I wonder if, so here's our guy, Peter. He's got the keys. He's probably the oldest one of the bunch. I guarantee you Peter was saying, well, I'm not washing feet. I'm Peter. Let Thaddeus do it. Nobody knows him, But whatever the case, maybe maybe they didn't do any of that. That's what I would have probably done. Nobody washed his own feet. And then the scripture is so clear that they were actually eating the meal. They had actually begun, the meal had been served, still no foot washing was going on. And then can you imagine the feeling in the room when Jesus gets up, takes off his tunic, wraps a towel around his waist, pours a basin of water, and starts to walk towards the first disciple. I bet you at that point, Peter was like, darn it, I should have done that. Oh no, how embarrassing that Jesus is, oh no. And then he starts to wash their feet. And he washes all of them. He washes Peter's feet. We're going to get back to that. He washes Judas's feet. He washes the whole gang. And in that, think of what he did not do. He did not lecture them. You proud so-and-snum, something like that in Greek. He didn't lecture them. He washed them, loved them. He didn't give them a test. Okay, now let's see if you were really paying attention here. Didn't do that. Didn't talk about Old Testament theology. You know, like he could have like connected with like 10 things in the Old Testament at that point. Didn't do that. What did he do? Don't miss this. He just washed feet. He just loved them and loved them really well. And so what I want you to see is any church that bears the name of Jesus that doesn't see he started with love, ended with love, demonstrated love is going to miss the boat. It's going to not be the church of the future that he thought about. But then it goes a little bit farther than that, because in verses 6 through 11, we get this back and forth with our guy, Peter, who is the picture of who Jesus picks to lead his church. Young, inexperienced, full of bravado and just, what's the word I keep looking for? He's looking for, Peter is, what's when you do something and you think second? What's that? Impulsive, thank you. Oh my gosh. That word was not coming to my brain. Impulsive, yes. And so watch what happens when he comes to Peter. Verses 6 through 11. It says, he comes to Peter and Peter says, Jesus, are you going to wash my feet? And he goes, yeah, you don't understand exactly now, but you will later. And then he makes this proclamation, never will you wash my feet. And it actually is more than in the English. It says, from now to the end of the age, you will never wash my feet. So Peter is making this like declaration, you know, and this is what, then he goes from that to, and Jesus says, well, if I don't, then you don't have any part with me. And then what does he do? He's like, well, wash all of me, you know? And this, is this a young leader? This is exactly right. Right? The young leaders have enthusiasm and maybe not much else, but they got enthusiasm, you know? And so Peter's like, you can't wash my feet ever till the end of the age. And Jesus is like, well, that's not going to work. Okay, then wash all of me, you know? And here he is. And Jesus just says this really interesting thing. So if you don't accept my love, that's not going to work. It actually says, think about the importance of this. You will have no part with me. You will be no part of what I am doing if you do not receive my love. So then Peter's like, all of me. And then she's like, no, you kind of missed the point. If you took a bath, and this is not a lesson on did you take a bath, Peter, or not take a bath, Peter. He says, you know, wash my head and my hands too, is actually what he says, which were the two ceremonial cleansings that the Jewish people would have done before going into worship. It would ceremonially wash their hands, ceremonially wash their head. And so Peter's like, you need to do like all of that. And Jesus says this really interesting thing. No, because of what I'm going to do for you, you are going to be completely clean in terms of being invited into the presence of the King. I've got that one taken care of. You would never be clean enough to do that on your own. But then he says, but you're going to have to keep coming back to get your feet washed. Now watch this just for a second. If you've been at this for any length of time, or if this is your first Sunday in church and forever and ever and ever, this is so important because there's two types of dirty here and there's two types of clean, and both of them impact the way that you understand love. Both of them impact how you receive love from God. There is one that is you are completely unclean when it comes to your comparison to a holy God. Are we pretty clear on that? I mean, if you're not, raise your hand. I'll just start pointing out things about you that aren't exactly holy. Or I'll ask the person next to you. That's probably way easier, right? They know. And so, yeah, us in terms of presence of a holy God isn't going to work unless we are seen as the holiness of Jesus being given to us, being imparted to us. So Jesus lives the life that we owed and died the death that we deserve so that in this way you are clean. You receive that from Jesus. You can't earn that. You receive that cleanliness from Jesus. That's what he's saying to Peter. You don't need all that. I've got that one covered for you. What you need is this other kind that says, Peter, you're not always going to do the right thing. And you know, a young leader, he would reply, yes, I will. In fact, just a few pages later, he goes, I will never forsake you. And then what does he do? Yeah, forsakes, yeah. And Jesus knew that. He knows that about you and me. He's like, even though you are washed, you are clean, you have been invited into the presence of the most holy God, you need to come back for a foot washing regularly. And you need to confess, gosh, I did not do that one right. I let my pride get in front of my faith. I let my fear get all up in my feelings. I'm sorry. And Jesus says, you're going to need to do that too. Now, here's the thing. If you just get one or the other, you don't really get the whole love of Jesus. Can I explain it that way? In other words, if you just get the washing of the blood of Jesus that brings you into the Holy of Holies, but you don't understand that what you do actually matters, you will just be who cares? God's going to forgive me anyway. And you will not change. You will not be a part of the church that Jesus envisioned. You will not be transformed. On the other hand, if you get the foot washing, come and confess and say you're sorry, but you don't get but you've been cleaned once and for all. You're just a religious tightwad. Is that like you just are so afraid that you're going to get something wrong and it's going to disqualify you. And Jesus is like, no, I got that one covered. Do you see that? You got to get both in order to understand the love that Jesus has for you. And what happens if you don't? He says you'll have no part. If you don't receive both of those kinds of love, Jesus says you'll have no part with me. Okay, so what about the church of the future? Well, if it's going to be like Jesus, it starts with love, ends with love, so the middle is love. It demands that you understand the demonstration of love. It wasn't lecturing, it wasn't theology, it was washing feet. And then it demands that you receive that love Because if you don't receive it, you cannot give it. And the last thing that Jesus says is, and you should love like me. Now that you have been loved, that's why it's so critical, now I want you to go and love. That's my plan for the church. And he gives us here this formula. There's not many formulas that Jesus gives, but he gives a formula for being blessed. He says, if you do this, you will be blessed. Now, how many times do you and I pray, Jesus, bless this person, bless that person, bless me, bless my family, bless, nothing wrong with that prayer. But when I'm praying it, I almost feel like Jesus is going, did you read chapter 13? Because it says right here, if you do this, you will be blessed. I gave you the blueprint for how to receive blessing. And so, do you understand what I have done for you? Let me say this and we'll move towards the close, because this is such an important difference. There is a difference between understanding the importance of love and being a lover. Let me say it again. There's a difference between understanding the importance of love, voting for it as a principle, and actually loving. And which one do you think Jesus thinks is more important? Actually loving. Yeah, you could argue that you need both, but this one without this one misses the point. And it's just like that in every piece of the picture of the future church. Jesus did not envision the church being a way to make you nicer. Or to get you to follow the rules. Jesus did not create the church of the future so that you would behave better. He created the church so that you would be transformed. Do you see that? Let me give you a couple other quick examples. The law says, don't lie. So you could do it this way. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie. Oh, I lied. Forgive me, Lord. Forgive me, Lord. Okay, good. You missed some of the point. The point is that you have the ability, because God lives in you, to have your heart renewed in intimacy and integrity and producing a life of transparency where it didn't even come to your mind not to be honest, truthful, completely transparent with people. The law says you should care for the poor. So a basket comes by, somebody talks to me. Or you have your heart transformed to one of compassion, to where, you just can't wait to participate with God in the next thing that he shows you that's near his heart. That's just different. And one is the church of the future that Jesus expresses and hopes for and prays for and will build, by the way, with a bunch of Peters, which are a bunch of people like Peter who don't quite get it yet. And he's like, that's okay. You're exactly who I need. And so here's what I want to express to you as we make decisions personally, corporately, together as a congregation, that we would have this picture in front of us, that Jesus' last lesson was to love. He did it really simply, really basically. And if we ever miss that part, we will not be the church that Jesus envisioned. And we have the opportunity to take some young leaders, whether they are Gen X, Y, Z, Alpha, Beta, I don't know, whatever, and to say, here's the keys. And know that they might not get it quite yet, but to say, you're the church of the future. And we want to make sure that you understand this central piece of receiving love and then giving it from Jesus. All right, that's all I got today. Let's respond to God personally. I'm going to invite the team to come back up. And as they lead us, we're going to respond to God together. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you so much for all of the ways that you have loved. You loved from the beginning to the end. And your last lesson was love. And what a profound lesson. I'm still trying to learn. God, speak to our hearts now. We are listening, and we want your love to change us so that we could love others well. We pray it in your name. Amen.